Hi folks, this is Tim Garman for SIT on NZDP101, and this is a tutorial for the week 12 image, which, as you can see, I've got open, and this is for discussion board number 6. So this is the penguin sign that I've downloaded from course materials, and there's another file that you will need called light.crw, so that's a raw file. I'm going to drag it in from off on my desktop and just drag it and drop it into the background. So that opens it up in Camera Raw. Now there's not much that I want to do to this. As you can see, I've got the clipping indicator in the histogram checked, so we can see what's being burnt out. And obviously a lot of area in that lamp is being burnt out. So we're going to, I've just got the basic tab open, and we're going to just reduce the highlights down a bit. Now, we're not going to be able to restore all of that area, but that's about as much as we can do. So we can begin to see the bulb and more of those highlights and detail within or inside the lamp. So that's all I'm really going to do there. So I'm going to click OK. So, and then we can double click that to apply. And as you can see now, that's come in as a separate layer, and we've got the indicator there that tells me it's a smart object. And that will be useful because we want to adjust the size later on, and we don't want to destroy the quality of that image. So it being a smart object will protect that. Now let's mask out the background of this lamp. So let's zoom in and see how we can do that. I'm going to choose the magic wand tool, which is there, and just looking at the tolerance I've got, let's set that to 10. I'm hoping that will work for me. And I'm going to focus on selecting this darker frame around the edge of the lampshade. So click once, and then to get the rest of it, shift click, and that way you add to that selection. And let's go in even closer. Shift click again. Let's see how successful this is going to be. That's pretty good. Okay, and let's try the chain. Well, that's doing quite a good job. Now I'm not going to try and get the cord and this connection point here, simply because it's just too close to the background color. So I'm going to work with that. I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Mask, and Reveal Selection, and then zoom back out to see what we've got. Okay, let's use the mover tool to move it into place. Now I'm going to want this lamp quite a bit bigger than it is at the moment, which means that really I need to extend this crossbeam out. So we'll deal with that in a little while. So I'm going to estimate where it's going to go, probably about there. And looking at the line that this upright pole is making, I want that chain to be roughly following that line. So I'm going to need to rotate slightly. So Command T or Control T takes me into the transform function, and just outside of the corner I get rotate, so I can rotate that slightly to, if we want to be exact, we can go down there and match it perfectly. I think actually with perspective it probably should be out that way a little bit more. Okay, let's leave it at that. That looks about right. I think I was right at the first time. So that's fine. So we'll double click that. And then we need to reveal the rest of this light. So we've got the mask selected. So we need to be working in black and white. So we've got black as our foreground color. Well, black conceals. So we need to be editing our mask to reveal more of this. So we want white there, and I can toggle between black and white using the X key on the keyboard. So let's go in a bit closer and choose the brush tool. I'm going to need a bigger brush than that. And I'm going to work with quite a large brush and with hardness at 100% because I don't want to go over the edge of this lamp. So we can paint back in the bit that's missing. And let's go in closer than that. Just make sure we get everything. And there's some, let's go for a smaller brush. Get some of these bits that need a bit of retouching. Okay, that's looking good to me. Now, we also need to find the cord and the connection point that we can't see at the moment. So I need to reveal a bit more there. I'll go to a smaller brush, and there is that cord. Now let's go to a smaller brush still, because I want to retain the edge of that chain. So let's find where all of this circular connection is, and it's probably going to come around just the other side of the chain. Okay, so that's all of that visible. So now we have to think about how we're going to select that, and we've obviously got a circle to think about, and we've got what would be ideally a straight line, but really it isn't. If it was a straight line, I would say use the polygonal lasso tool, go down the cord and change the color, foreground color, to black. So we're editing the mask. Use the polygonal lasso tool, fill the area with black, and we can chop bits off of that, but it's not really a straight line. That's the only thing. So I'm going to use the pen tool, and it's another opportunity to practice with this tool. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to click and drag so that I get a handle, because that enables me to get a curve. And I want to, because there's a bit of a curve coming around here, I want to choose the part where the curve really ends and starts going in the other direction, and click and drag. And then we'll take the next point where it joins the lamp, and click and drag. And we can just go to the other side of the cord, click and drag. Click and drag next to the anchor point on the other side, and click and drag here where it joins the connection. Now, so that's part of the path drawn. Here we've got a change in direction. So at the moment you see the handles are joined, and while I've got the pen tool selected, if I click on the command tool, which will be on a Mac, and it will be control on the PC, you see we get the direct selection tool appear. So I can edit the handle using the direct selection tool. So if you want to go back and edit any of these points, you can do that way. but I also now want to change direction. So I don't want these two handles linked. So if I choose my, let's think, how do I do this? I'm going to be clicking the Option key on the keyboard. So that'll be on a Mac, that'll be the Alt key on a PC, and that, when I click and drag now, gives me a change in direction. So I can then release the Option key and click there. So I'm starting to get the curve of this connection point. So I'm going to want to come around, maybe it's just about hidden by the chain under there. So let's take a point round about there, click and drag. I'm not holding anything else down on the keyboard, and just also there where the shadow disappears, we'll click and drag. Now don't worry if it's not absolutely in the right place, because we can edit this. So that's going to be totally in the wrong place, but I'm going to ignore that for the moment. And the last point again will be a change of direction. We don't want a smooth curve around that point, it's a corner. So hold the Option key down, or the Alt key, and you will get a corner. So then I'm going to just I'm going to go to the actual direct selection tool now, and I'm going to click away so that the path is deselected. Click it again so all these anchor points are editable, and let's sort that one out. Well, we can do that just by taking that handle down, and I think that needs to be a change of direction really. So if I hold the Option key down, or the Alt key, I can edit that that handle, and I'm going to do the same to that one, and that one needs to come in a bit, and that perhaps out a bit, and that's probably going to be okay. So what I need to do now is turn that into a selection, and if I go to the Paths palette, while we're here, let's save this path. It's a work path at the moment. Let's save the path and we'll call it chord. And then we're going to go to make selection. You see the path is still selected, so we'll go to make selection and just click OK. And now we've got that area selected. So it's actually the outside that we want to remove. So to do that, let's think, what are we going to do? We're going to go to select and inverse. So now we've got the rest, everything else selected. And we want to remove this from the mask. So if we're editing a mask, let's see, I usually get this the wrong way around. So we're going to go to our paintbrush tool, and we've got black, and that is the right way around. So black conceals, and that's exactly what we want to do. So we can go around painting black onto our mask, which is concealing that background of this lamp image. Now when we get to the bit that we want to retain, let's just be a little bit careful about how we do this. We should be able to do that okay. And I think we'll just take all of that bit off, but making sure we don't cut into the chain. We can go all the way down there. Again, I did get a bit close to the chain, so but it's workable. And let's go to a smaller brush for this as well, I think, for that bit there. And it's just a tiny little bit that I would quite like to remove a very small brush. Okay, so that is working, I think. and I'll deselect Command D or Control D. Now let's just reduce that back down. The next thing I want to do is start to extend this crossbeam so that we've got something to attach the light to. So what I'm going to do is go back to the layers palette, and I'm going to create a duplicate of the background layer. So we might call it pole extension. I'm being very good at naming all my layers, so it will help you to do that. So we've now got a duplicate background layer, and I'm going to reduce the opacity a bit. And the reason for that is that when I go over to the mover tool to move it, you can see where it is in relation to the other layer. So let's zoom in, still with the mover tool now, and think about how far do we want to take this. I don't want to have to start retouching or cloning out this chain, so I think probably about there will work. And we will have to reposition the lamp a little bit when we've done that. And also this hook is getting duplicated. We've got a hook here and a hook here, so we'll probably just clone that one out. So the next stage is to, I think we might actually turn the background off so we can only see this layer. Is that a good idea? I think that will be okay. And we can then take the opacity up. Now we are going to want to retain this area of the crossbeam and mask everything else out. So let's start with the magic wand tool and see what we get. I wonder if it might be a better idea to use the quick selection tool. Let's see where this goes. What we don't want to do is let's zoom in closer. What we don't want to do is end up losing the end of the pole. So let's take the brush down even smaller, and I can just use my Option or Alt key just to go back and recapture that part along there. So I'm just working with the Option key, and that's looking actually quite good. So now I'm going up to the layer menu, layer mask, and hide selection. So that's left this area. We've got a bit more to remove, but that's okay. And in fact, if we turn the background back on and see what we've got going on up here. So we've got to remove this part and this bit of chain. So really we're removing that area to leave this part. So let's think. We want the brush tool. We want a reasonable sized brush. And we've got black as our foreground color. So we can just remove. We want to remove this chain, but let's, well, as we do that, let's just take the hardness down because we want to blend that in to the new part of the crossbeam. Just gone back to painting white on because I didn't quite like what I'm seeing there. So let's go back to black again and work with a smaller brush. Okay, that's better. Right, now I've got a little edge there that I quite like to remove. And I'll take the hardness back up again, I think, and okay, I'm happy with that. Now, one last thing is a bit of cloning to do, and I'm going to do this destructively. Now, when that happens, it's always a good idea to take a copy. So that layer that I'm working on, I want to clone out that kind of hook area. So I'm going to duplicate the layer and pole extension copy, let's live with that name, and that's the one that I'll turn off, I think, and I can drag it to the bottom, and if actually what I might do is actually unlock the background layer and drag that underneath it just so it's right out of the way, and so it's only there if I need to go back to it if I'm not happy with how this this turns out. So I need to make sure I've got the thumbnail selected. And let's go to the clone stamp tool and a slightly larger brush. Choose a bit of colour that we like. Hold the Option key down to sample. And then we'll just paint that back in. Just being careful about the edge. Might even just select the edge. And there we go. Okay. So that's looking okay. I'm just thinking I might take out some of this, which looks like it might happen at the end of the pole, and because that's not the end of the pole, I don't really want that kind of distressed look just there. But it's actually not as easy as it sounds, because it just happens where the end of the mask happens on the pole extension. So there's a couple of things that I need to do to be able to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is control click the mask and disable it. So it's now not working anymore, so we can see the whole of that pole extension layer. And so then I want to select the layer thumbnail and the clone stamp tool. I want to clone a bit of this white area over this area of the post, and then I'm going to extend the mask to include it. So it's a bit of a two-step process. So let's option click to select, and actually let's option click the side, because I'm going to paint that in just there. So I can paint a bit of sky in, paint the chain out, and that's probably going to be, let's take the shadow out as well. That's taken that out quite nicely. So let's now control click the mask and enable the mask. So that's enabled it, but you can see that that distressing has reappeared. That's because we've got to now extend the mask on this pole extension so we can see the bit that covers it up. So we need to be painting white onto the mask. So let's select the mask. We've got white as our foreground colour. Let's choose the paintbrush. And if we go over that, we see we can just now reveal a bit more, and that now works for me. One last thing I want to do to the lamp is just make it a bit larger. It's looking a bit small at the moment. So Command T on the Mac and Control T on the PC, and we can move into the transform function, and we can enlarge this. Just note that on the current version of Photoshop, you don't need to hold Shift down to constrain the proportions or keep the proportions. But if you're on an older version of Photoshop, you will need to hold Shift down when you enlarge this lamp. So we'll just get it looking a reasonable sort of size. I think I'm happy with that. And also we can move it into position as well when we're on this transform function. So just about there is going to be fine. Double click to apply. Right, let's think about adding some type to this image. So we're going to go over and choose the type tool. I'm going to click on the image. When we do that, two things happen. We get a type layer, which will be a smart object, and we get some dummy text, which usually appears in Latin, and we can type over that with the word that we want, Photoshop. Now with the type tool still selected, we can highlight that text so we can edit it further. And we've got some options up in the options strip for editing. We've also got a character palette, which gives us some other options. Now, I've chosen a font and I've gone for Copperplate. Now, it's up to you what font you use. You may not have that one available, but I would suggest use something bold. The reason being that we want to put some texture inside these letters. And if it's too thin, it just won't show up. So choose something bold. I've chosen Copperplate, and I've noticed that Copperplate looked a bit overspaced, so I've actually added in a -50 on the spacing, or the tracking, that is actually. So that's closed it up a bit, and that will enable me to get the font a bit larger in this space where it's going to appear. So back to layers. Just a couple of other things. We can change the point size up in the options strip. We can also change the color. So we've got a color picker there. The color picker appears. I've stuck with black because I think we're going to be able to see that okay both on the white and the black area. And we're going to be putting the word Photoshop and rocks into this sign. So that's looking good. We can move outside of the type, and the cursor turns to the mover tool, so we can move it around while we're doing that. So the other thing we want to do is transform it. So we're going to rotate it, enlarge it, and to do that we need to move onto the mover tool, and then we can hit on the keyboard Command T or Control T. Just if you need to go to the menu for that, that's under Edit and Transform, or Free Transform. So Command T, and I can move that around still. I can also, if I move outside the box, move to be able to rotate. And if I go to the corner, I can enlarge as well. So we're going to be putting it there, but before we do that, just want to demonstrate something. If I put this over against the upright pole and use the edge as a measuring device, you'll notice that the pole is wider at the top, wider at the bottom than it is at the top, and obviously the text at the moment isn't. So we need to apply some sort of distortion when we put this text onto the sign that makes the bottom of the text wider than the top, just so that it conforms to the perspective that we're seeing. So how do we do that? Well, let's first of all just position that where we want it. That looks about okay. And we will double click that to apply that transformation. But if we're going to distort this text, we can't do it while it's a smart object. So I'm going to rasterize it, but before I rasterize it, I think I'll take a copy of it just in case I need to go back to the unrasterized version for some reason. So we're going to duplicate the layer. Photoshop copy is okay as a title, and we're going to drag that just down to the bottom and switch it off. And that's my stash of spare layers if I need to go back to them. So going back to the one at the top, I can control click that and choose rasterize type. So now it's no longer type, it's actually shapes. And when it's shapes, we can do lots more editing. So I'm going to choose Command T again, which is the transform, or Control T if you're on a PC. And now I've got some options for distortion. So if I go to transform, you'll see we've got perspective or distort. Let's try perspective and see if that probably does what we want it to do. And we can actually, no, I think we'll leave it where it is. It's going to be easier to judge here. So it's certainly getting wider at the bottom when I do that, and I can go to rotate and just reposition that as well. So I think I'm happy with that. Saying I'm happy with that, there's just one thing I noticed, and that is the plane that P is in should really match that post, and it's not. So what can I do about that? Well, I'll just go back to transform, and I'm going to choose distort. And if I then just drag that corner up a little bit, you can see that it's beginning to, that P is beginning to match that. It's probably not going to be, it doesn't need to match it exactly because it's a bit lower down, but that's close enough. It just helps it a little bit. Let's see if we can add some texture into this word. So the first thing that I want to do, I'm going to be using the texture from this part of the sign. So I need to duplicate that layer, and I'm going to choose this one, the pole extension layer, to create a duplicate of. So we'll go to the layer palette menu and duplicate the layer, and let's give it a different name. I'm going to call it Photoshop texture. And there we've got the copy of that layer. And I'm going to drag it up so it sits above, or just below, I should say, the Photoshop layer. And I'm also going to delete this layer mask because I'm not going to need that, because that's the mask that goes around the lamp. So you can see we've got a bit of lamp missing at the moment. So control clicking the mask, I can delete layer mask. So now we're only seeing this duplicate of the image. So next we're going to go up and select the Photoshop layer, and we're going to go to layer, layer mask, from transparency. So we've got a mask now made around the text, and that mask we're going to want to sit actually on the layer below. So I've dragged it from the Photoshop layer to the Photoshop texture layer. And I've just noticed I've spelled that wrong. Photoshop. Now, we've got this mask that's created from the letters, so that means we no longer need this Photoshop layer, and that's a good reason for making the copy down here, because we're now going to delete it. And as we delete it, we see what's revealed. We see that we've got a mask that's created from the letters, and because if I switch some of these things off, it'll help you to see to some extent. Maybe it won't. Because we're seeing through those letters a repositioned penguin sign, we're actually seeing this part of the sign inside the letters. So that's great. That's what we wanted to achieve. Now we're going to want to be able to move the texture around to reposition it inside the letters. Now, if I just try moving it with the mover tool, the whole word moves. That's not what we want. So what we're going to have to do is unlink, just by clicking the link between the thumbnail and its mask. Once they're no longer linked, I can move the background inside that mask. So I can reposition it to the right sort of area that we want. Now we've got to be careful because we've got a bit of sky appearing just there. So if I position it, and I'm really thinking we're losing too much of the end of the word here. So what I need to do is blow that up a bit. So we're going to choose Command T on the Mac, Control T on the PC. So we can enlarge that to a sort of size that we want, and we can reposition, just watching that sky on the first P. And now we want a bit of this broken type working there, but we don't want to lose it too much. So let's take that a bit more, just position that so we haven't got the blue in the P, and maybe something like that. Still thinking about this. Okay, I'm going to live with that. Double click to apply. Now it's exactly the same process for creating the word rocks. So we'll just choose the type tool, click, type in rocks. Now this is going to want to be, we'll start with white I think, but keeping in mind that we eventually lose the colour because it becomes a mask, but let's just turn it to white for the moment. Let's just click up in there, that will do. We can move it around. We're going to rotate. Now we want it to be, this is where black may have been a better option. We want it to be lined up with the word Photoshop, so just use that as a guide, and then we want it significantly larger, I would say. See how big we can get this. Let's go with that. So we've got our word rocks in place. Let's make a copy of this as we did with the Photoshop word. So duplicate layer, rocks copy, we'll drag that down to the bottom and switch it off. And now we can rasterize that layer so that we can add some distortion. So Control and click and choose rasterize type, and then we can go to the transform. Let me think, we used perspective. It's only a subtle change, but just enough to give it the feel of being authentic. And just looking at the top of the R, remember we adjusted the P, so let's go back to transform and choose distort and just skews it into a better perspective and double click to apply. Okay, so now we move into repeating that process for adding the texture into this type. Now, one thing I would say is that the texture on the black is much more noticeable than it is on the white. So we're going to have to do a bit of extra distressing to this word, I think. But let's go through the same process first of all. So let's repeat the process now and duplicate the pole extension again. Duplicate layer, and this time we'll call this rocks texture. I'm going to drag that up to just below the rocks layer. I'm going to delete its layer mask. Control click and delete layer mask. Then we're going to select the rocks layer and exactly repeating the same process, layer, layer mask from transparency. And we drag that mask down to sit with the rocks texture. And then we can delete that, in fact, delete that layer. Now, not forgetting to unlink these two, unlink the thumbnail from its mask. We can then move around the white area of the sign inside the rocks word. So we're going to need to increase that in size just so we can get enough white in there. So Command T or Control T. Let's increase the size of that area. And let's make sure we're getting, that's better, isn't it? Yeah, just make sure you're getting the correct area of white, that you're not using the cloud, but you're actually using the white of the sign. And I'm just wanting to make sure I am actually doing that. That's the bit that I want. Okay, so that's fine. I mean, obviously there's not very much grain appearing in that, so we're going to have to do a bit of work on that to add some additional distressing. Now the next part of the edit, which I'm going to look at distressing the words a bit more, is actually going to be a destructive part. So whenever I'm doing a destructive piece of editing, I always like to take a copy of the image or the layer at that stage so that I can go back to something that hasn't been destroyed if necessary. So I'm going to select both the word layers, and to do that I'm just going to shift click the second layer, and I'm going to hit the folder icon at the bottom, which is the group icon, and that has put those two layers in a group. And what I want to do then is copy that group. So I'm going to go to the layers menu and duplicate group. And since that's the copy, we're going to switch that one off and drag it to the bottom with my stash of spare layers. Now the next thing we want to do is add some distressing or additional distressing to this text. So we've got the two type layers here. Let's start with the Photoshop layer, and we want to select the actual mask. And then we need to have a look at our brush presets, and this gives us an opportunity to do this. So we've got brush settings in the palettes menu, and as we scroll through we see we've got a lot of different brushes that we can use, and you'll find actually on the internet lots of other free and paid for brush sets that you can load into here, so you can actually build this up into something that works for exactly the type of work you want to do. Now I've had a look through this already, and just to save a bit of time really, there's one particular one I want to have a look at, and it's number, or I want to use, number 174. So I'm going to select that, and if I you see the cursor is the shape of a textured brush. But if I look at the direction of the texture on this sign, it's pretty much going down almost vertically, and this brush isn't. But I can actually change that, and if I can get that going in roughly the same direction, it might be a bit more useful. Okay, we've also got a spacing control where we can look at how the individual, if I clicked once with this brush, how it would look. And we've got various other controls over how the brush works. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to, because it could take a long time otherwise, but this is the brush I'm going to try. So let's open up our layer palette again. So I've got the mask selected, and since I'm working on the mask, I'm going to need to have the brush tool selected and black in the color, and this will obviously hide using black. So if I clicked across that P, I can start to use some of this brush to break up this type a little bit more, and we don't want to overdo it because it looks a bit fake then, but we just want to do enough that adds a bit of an effect. That's probably enough on the word Photoshop. We need to do a bit more on rocks because that's not broken up at all. So let's choose rocks this time, and we're selecting the mask, and let's see what we can do with this. And by all means use a different brush. You might find something that works better than this. Let's do something drastic. Okay, well that's beginning to look a little bit more authentic. Now we're going to work on the lighting of this image. So the first thing I want to do is to create a new group. So I'm going to click down here so I haven't got anything selected, and create a group. And I'm going to give this group a name, and I'm going to call it light. And what I want to do is put everything inside that group. Now we've got some things here that are switched off, so we can ignore those. So if I shift click all of these layers and include let's close that group, and we're going to drag everything inside the light group. So just to prove it's all inside that group, and we've now got a group inside a group as well. And then I'm going to duplicate that group. Duplicate group, and we're going to call this dark. Okay, let's turn this image to black and white, or a night sky version. To do that, we're going to use the adjustment layers, and let's just drag this up so we can see what's going on. So when I click this adjustment layer, I'm going to choose the black and white option. Now we've got these sliders in the properties panel, and I'm going to set most of them to 50. I'm going to leave the blues, and I'm going to adjust the blues manually and take those down. Let's see. Round about there. And then looking back at the layers palette, let's just open that up again. We can also adjust that layer, or that adjustment layer, with the opacity. We'll take that down to 50. We're going to work on the saturation of this image a bit more, so just select the top layer, which is the adjustment layer, and we're going to put another adjustment layer in. Let's just move this again so you can see what's going on. I'm going to choose hue saturation, and we're going to reduce the saturation down to about something like that. That should be okay. And then one more adjustment layer. This time, let's think. Curves is what we want. And we want to take the highlights down, and we'll just turn that into a bit of a curve. Oops. We want to still see what's going on, but okay, that's working for me. The next thing to do is select the light group and just move it up to the very top of the layer palette. And now we've gone back to daylight, as you can see. But we're going to add to this group, the light group, we're going to add a layer mask. So click on the layer mask icon at the bottom, and that adds that mask to the whole of that group. And we're going to want it to be filled with black. So I can do that by going Command I or Control I on a PC. And then we've got a mask over the whole lot. So it's now hiding that, so we're back to nighttime. We're going to want to disable for the moment this layer mask. So Control click the layer mask, and the top option is disable. Now the next thing we want to do is create a selection just around the sign part, the penguin part of this sign. And although we can do that with the quick selection tool just by going over that, and it does a reasonable job, what it does struggle to do is catch this thin edge, and we can't use the magic wand tool unless we open that group up. So that's what I'm going to suggest we do. We select the magic wand tool. Let's deselect the selection we've got, open up the group, and go to the what was our original background. And if we blow this image up just to look at this edge of the sign, it's because it's in some places not too dissimilar to the background. So with the magic wand tool, and I've got it set to 20 at the moment, we'll see how that does. So that goes up to the top there, and we can then shift click. Let's get the easy part. I'm clicking with the Shift key held down to add to the selection, and that's got all of that. So if we zoom in even more and shift click, we'll see how far that goes. Okay, it's getting there. Right, that's all of that. So now let's get the rest of it, and for this we'll go back to the quick selection tool, and remember, because we're adding to the selection we've already got, we need to hold the Shift key down. Let's start with the beak, and we'll just go down and make sure you get all the type as well, because it will leave some of that out if we don't actually go out over it. And then the bottom edge. Okay, so that seems to have got all of that. We could just go in a bit closer and get this little bit of an edge that we've missed there. And just holding the Shift key down, let's just see if we can include that. Okay, even better. Right, I'm going to save this selection for future use. So I'm going to create a new layer. And let's call it selection. And in fact, let's call it sign selection. And then layer mask, and reveal selection. Okay, next we're going to drag this layer down to the bottom because it's not a layer that I actually want to use, and we're going to switch it off. But what I do want is the mask that we created. So I'm going to actually take a copy of it, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key. But before I do, let's just enable this mask at the top on the light group. So Control click and enable mask, and then we're going to Alt click and drag, which will make this a copy, and we're going to apply it to the top group. And we're asked if we want to replace the mask. We'll say yes. So now we've got that mask that we've created applied to that top group. And what's happening here now is that the whole of our penguin sign is illuminated, and the rest is in darkness. However, that's not quite the effect that we want. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Control button and click the mask and add mask to selection. So that gets us back to the selection that we created. I'm just looking at that selection, and there's a bit of refining that I'd quite like to do before I do anything more. So if I go to the quick selection tool and hold the Shift key down, I just want to make sure that all those little bits that I'd missed earlier are selected. Or perhaps they've reappeared, I'm not sure, but I don't want them there. Oops. Let's undo that. That looks okay. I think I can probably just, I don't think this will make a lot of difference, but might just, oh, okay, that's slightly better. Yeah, I think when we're looking at it at that size, that's acceptable. So I need to have a bit of a fade going up through this sign, and for that I'm going to use the gradient tool. Now you might find it hidden under one of these other tools. When I select that, we've got some options up here, and I can select my gradient by clicking in the gradient editor. Now it's actually already where I want it to be, but if it wasn't, I can click here and choose a colour, and I can also click here and choose an opacity. If I didn't want it 100% black, I could reduce that down. And at the other end we've got white, but we've actually got 0% white, so it's actually transparent at that end and solid black at that end, and a gradient between the two. So that's fine. I'm going to make sure I select my mask, and I've got that active selection, so my gradient is going to be retained within the sign. So I'm going to click somewhere and drag and see what happens. And that may be sufficient, but if that's not right, undo it and click in a different place and try something else. It probably was okay the first time, but maybe I'll go a little bit lower. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. Let's deselect that sign because that's pretty much done, and think about just lightening this lamp now. So to do that, let's open up the dark group folder, and we're going to select the mask that is the light, and I'm going to control click that and add mask to selection. So now that's selected that lamp, so that's an easy way of selecting it without having to do it again. So we can close down the dark group and open up the light one. In fact, we don't really need to open it, but let's leave it open anyway, and we're going to select the mask that is attached to the whole group, which means now that that selection is being applied to that mask. And when we've got that, if we've got our paintbrush tool selected and we've got white selected, which is going to reveal, so at the moment if you can just about see the mask, you know that all that is being revealed is the top of this penguin sign with a bit of a fade through it. So if we start painting the lamp, we're going to be revealing that. All the way down to the cord. Now while we have the lamp selected, we can do a little bit more work on that, and of course because it's a smart object we can double click the filter and open it back up in Camera Raw. That's a nice thing about having that smart object and that link to Camera Raw. We can do a bit more editing here. So we're going to just drag the blacks down a little bit just to darken it so it's in keeping with the nighttime scene that it's being put into. We'll take contrast up a bit, and let's have a look at clarity. We'll sharpen it a little bit. Okay. Now let's just have a look at this light, because let's deselect, and if we go in close we can see that we've got a bit of a pale outline around that. Now that's not a great thing to have. It's always a giveaway that an image has been created from more than one element. So we want to try and remove that just so that it makes it look more as if the light has always been in this image. So I've got the mask selected, and I'm going to control click that and open up select and mask. and it's just thinking about doing that, so there we go. And just make sure that we have decontaminate colors selected, and I've already shifted these controls around a bit, but I've been playing with the shift edge control, so I've got that at about, well, 13% now. I've taken the contrast up, that could go up a bit more, just to make this edge sharper, and I've taken the feather down. So if we then click OK, we see that that outline has gone. We've got a couple of little blue bits appearing around the chain, but the whole lamp has been improved. So let's see if we can do anything about those blue spots. Let's think. Let's take the brush down, and let's take hardness up, down further. Yeah, that will just fix that, and probably have to go down quite a lot more for the cord. Yep, so I'm painting white on the mask, and that's improved that considerably. Now, just looking at our lamp and where it's casting its glow, really the underside of, or the edge of this beak should be light because it's closest to the lamp. So let's see if we can lighten that area a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do that is let's close down that group, because I want to create a new layer. We can click the icon at the bottom, and let's give this a name. Let's call it beak edge. And all I'm going to do here, first of all, I'm going to zoom in so I can see a bit more. So I've got that layer selected. I've got my brush selected. I need white, so I'm just going to toggle to the white for the foreground colour, X on the keyboard to do that. And a slightly larger brush, I think, but not that big, somewhere in the middle, a bit smaller. And probably I'll need a smaller brush. But we can come around there as well, I think. Let's go to a much smaller brush. And what I might do is actually then take the hardness down. Just take this brush size up a little bit. See if I can get a little bit of a fade on that edge. Just where it curves over onto the front plane. Not sure if that'll make any difference, but it seems like a good idea. Okay, now we're going to choose a blending mode, and we can always go down and just sort of skip through all of these and see which one works the best, but I'm thinking that overlay might be a good option. Let's just have a look at all of them. But I will try one other thing as well, and that is just simply what happens if we take the opacity down. That's not really the effect I'm looking for, so let's go to overlay, and maybe it's a, now that would reduce the effect of the blending mode. I think I'll live with that. Now let's see if we can put a glow around this lamp. So let's just have a look at what we can do here. So we'll create a new layer, put it on top, and let's call it glow. Then let's take the eyedropper tool, and that's up here, and I want to select an orangey sort of colour. We can select it from the lamp, but let's first of all make sure we're on a layer that has that on it. So let's open up the light group, and we should then be able to pick that up, and we see it's there in the foreground colour. Let's close that down, go back to our glow layer, and we're going to pick the paintbrush tool and a reasonably large brush that covers the whole of the light, I think. Perhaps bigger than that. Let's try that. Make sure hardness is to 0. And so that's created a glow around the outside of the light, but of course it's obliterated the bulb and the interior of the light, which we really want to see. So what can we do about that? Let's try a blending mode first, and I'm thinking that something like, where are we, hard light might be useful, and we'll take the opacity down a bit. So that's subtle. It's subtly there just outside the lamp, and if we go to the eraser tool and again set our hardness to 0, we go for a that sort of size brush, and we could just go and erase that, but it may be that we want to do it in steps so that we can judge how much we need to take it down. So to do that, we can reduce the flow right down, and that will take a few clicks then, and we can make more of a judgment of how far we want to go. I think I'm going to leave it at that. One other thing I might do just to enhance this work around the glow a little more is to duplicate this layer and have one set to normal and the other set to hard light, and the normal one, well, both at 60%. And let's just see if that makes much of a difference. But it helps on the glow actually. What I think I'll do on the copy is do the same thing we did with the eraser tool and just reveal that bulb a bit more. Okay, that helps. I think I might just take the warmth out of that lamp a little bit more. It's just looking a little bit too warm. Okay, and it also would be quite good if some of this warmth from the lamp was thrown onto the sign. So let's have a look and see how we can do that. So let's open up the light group, and if we select the lamp, or we call it the light copy, and we're going to put an adjustment layer in, and it's going to go below the this light copy. So we're going to go to the adjustment layer, and I know you can't see that. Let's just see if I can do something about that. Yep, there we go. We're going to choose curves, and let's just make sure where that's gone. It needs to go below the lamp. So we'll just drag it below the light copy. and then go back to our properties and select red. And this is something we're going to want to increase, so we can do that, and we can see the red coming into the sign now. But at the same time, we want to reduce the greens. It's looking a little bit too purple at the moment. We'll reduce the blues, and the more we reduce the blues, we don't want to go too far because it goes too yellow then, but that starts to add that warmth into the sign as well. The thing I want to do to this image is to add a vignette at the bottom. It's not really going to be a true vignette, so it's really just going to be a bit of a fade into dark, just to draw your eye to the sign really. So let's select the top, very top layer, but we're going to create a new layer, which then we'll put that at the top, and let's call it vignette. And we'll select our brush tool. Now we certainly don't want orange, we want, let's click that and choose a black. And I'm going to reduce, so I really want to be able to see the bottom of my image. I can just about see it now. I want a large brush, which this is, well, let's go a bit larger. It's going to be pretty large, but that could be about right. Now, I've got black on the foreground colour, I've got my brush selected, I've got a large brush, but what I'll do is reduce the opacity, because if I don't, you know, it's going to do that kind of thing, which is not going to be great. So let's take it right down. So it's more of a subtle, I'm holding the mouse down all the time, so it's one long drag. And then if I release the mouse and go again, it will add it over the top and darker, and go darker still. Now, what I want to do as well is change the blending mode to multiply. So just see what sort of difference that makes. Not a huge amount, but let's just take that down a bit further at the bottom. And I think I'll leave it at that. So that's really the penguin sign finished. I hope you've been able to follow this along, and I hope it goes well for you.